the attempt to break through to the Gloucesters had to be abandoned. All hope of getting help to them evaporated. That afternoon, General Soule, the American commander of all the units in the area, radioed to ask how things were going. Brigadier Brodie, instead of urgently requesting the Gloucester's withdrawal, replied simply that things were a bit sticky. He couldn't have chosen a worse moment for a bit of British understatement. The American general was given no idea how bad things really were, and so he ordered 29th Brigade to hold their position. What followed was disaster.
At 10 p.m, the Chinese struck. The Gloucesters fought a bloody hand-to-hand battle and pushed back attack after attack. The battle raged all through the night.
It was the beginning of the end for the Gloucesters.
The entire 29th Brigade was at breaking point. If they didn't withdraw, they faced death or captivity. The attempt to get any relief to the Gloucesters may have been blocked, but over on the right, the Northumberland's line of retreat was still clear. Brigadier Brodie had ordered tanks up the track to escort them out. But the withdrawal became chaotic as the Chinese managed to swarm onto the track and climb on the British tanks. The crews of neighbouring tanks were forced to hose each other's tanks at machine gun fire in a desperate attempt to dislodge the clambering Chinese. The rescue of the Northumberlands was succeeding, but only just. But the Gloucesters, off to the west, were left to their fate. In the face of the rapidly advancing Chinese, Brigadier Brodie had by now been forced to withdraw the artillery supporting his troops. And once these vital guns were silenced, the men of the Gloucesters really were at the mercy of the Chinese.
The men stranded just up there on the top of Gloucester Hill were preparing for a nearly impossible task. They were going to try and make a break for it. But many had not slept or eaten for days, and with virtually no ammunition, getting back to friendly lines would be a near impossible task.
But the Gloucesters had little choice. They set out across the enemy-infiltrated stretch of land on what for many would be their final journey.
The Gloucesters had started the Battle of the Imjin with 700 men. 58 had been killed in the fighting. Only 63 made it back to the safety of British lines that night. Nearly 600 Gloucesters were taken prisoner.
It was a very shameful moment, surrendering. I hated doing it. Surrendering seemed to go against everything that I thought soldiering should be about.
The rest of 29 Brigade had fared little better than the Gloucesters, but those few days in April 1951 had taken their toll on the enemy too. Although 29 Brigade had lost a quarter of its men, it had destroyed nearly half of the Communist forces attacking them across the Imjin. And right the way along the entire battlefront in Korea, other British, American and Allied forces fought heroic battles of their own. No one knows exactly how many the Chinese lost, but it was in the tens of thousands. The Communist offensive ground to a halt along the entire battle line. It was to be the last major assault of its kind. The Chinese would never again launch an attack on the scale of the Spring Offensive of 1951. Like the Americans, they too had finally realized that neither of them could win control of the whole of Korea. While the Allied crushing of the Communist Spring Offensive in great part along the Imjin River, did not end the fighting immediately, it did bring both sides to the negotiating table. Yet when they first met on July the 10th, 1951, few could have had any inkling that the negotiations would drag on for over 2 years. All this time, the vicious battles for minor stretches of tactical ground continued, and the casualty rate soared. This increasingly futile war was to go on another 2 years before the fighting finally ended. The two sides agreed the position of the new border between them, and they agreed on roughly the line of the 38th parallel just about here. And on the 27th of July, 1953, they agreed a ceasefire. In 3 years of warfare, more than 2 million people had lost their lives, and a country had been devastated. And yet, the border between North and South Korea had barely changed. And there's one even bigger irony. The two sides have never signed a peace treaty. The state of war between North and South Korea still officially exists. To this day, Korea's two sides remain in an uneasy stalemate. North Korea is still one of the most undeveloped countries in the world, and fiercely secretive. South of the border, it's a very different story.
South Korea has developed into a vibrant and thriving democracy. Today, the two Koreas may be vastly different, but one thing hasn't changed.
For the people of North and South Korea, the threat of a return to hostilities still looms.
50 years after the ceasefire, South Koreans still plan for the worst.
Around twice a year, a siren sounds across the South Korean capital here in Seoul. It's a drill for the taking of immediate shelter in the event of a North Korean attack. For a few minutes, these city streets empty in readiness for return to hostilities.
There's an awful lot of very brave fights going on right the way along the line. Next time, 20th Century Battlefields brings you the Tet Offensive, fought in Vietnam. This massive communist assault was the turning point in the 20th century's longest war. I'll be explaining how the American military had to adapt itself to face up to a largely guerrilla fighting force.
And I'll be experiencing what it was like for the soldiers as they fought their way through South Vietnam.
The Tet Offensive was one of the most decisive battles of the 20th century.